Jane Austen is an English writer who first gave the novel its distinctly modern character through her treatment of ordinary people in everyday life. Professor Gordon's authoritative book, The Movement of English Prose, provided right and right again that the normal manner of Richardson and Fielding was to provide the basic prose for most of novel writing of the 18th and 19th century, and Jane Austen and Thackeray would remain heavily in their debt. But Austen did not simply just borrow from Regency English, but also from the politics of her age. Roger Sales sees the letters as an important literary text and a historical source for the period. These letters revealed the Regency's influence on Austen. The impatient and somewhat abusive tone in the letters arises out of the historical conditions and economic pressures under which they were written. Their highly theatrical qualities reveal an open-ended or continuous Regency drama. She was a writer who did not offer a fixed, conservative position on any one of the debates, but instead created texts that are open, genuinely dialogic, and unresolved. She celebrates confusion and secrecy in the very act of exposing and condemning them. Austen was sharply aware of war and tropical events, and has indeed taken us on a tour of Portsmouth's stations of war and Mansfield's Park. And the Garrison Chapel was covered with monuments erected to the memory of those who died in the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. And the ships at Spithead, which Fanny and Henry view, would have been used to hold French prisoners of war. G.H. Lewes' watershed essay on Austen in Blackwood magazine argued that Austen's provincial focus and everyday style were the constraints through which she achieved her artistic accomplishment. Austen exposed the patriarchal condition of her historical moment and the way romantic conventions coded for power and wealth, while simultaneously using the constraints of her provincial and domestic settings to her advantage. So you may ask, how did she do it? Or better yet, why did Austen resign to domesticity if she wanted to evoke the political? According to Auerbach, constraint cultivates a taste for freedom, and oppression forces all subjects to invent themselves. By attending how closely freedom can be casually disguised by domestic subservience, Auerbach shows how even her seemingly pallid Fanny Price can become a romantic hero as well as a heroine of romance. But another critic, Judith Butler, simply places Austen opposite to writers like Maria Edgeworth, who believed individual agency could be transformative. Edgeworth was optimistic about man and woman, wrote about all classes of society, addressed herself on general issues in the public at large. Jane Austen did none of these things. The tendency of her fiction is to rebuke individual self-assertion. Her novels were conservative in the sense that they offered social compromise rather than fractious challenges to the uncertain social future of her moment. Though coming to an opposite conclusion about Austen's political orientation, both Butler and Auerbach work within a dichotomous framework in which an individual responds to norms by either reinscribing or subverting them. So now the idea that Austen is not political enough, she cannot be taken seriously because she only teaches us charity for the ordinary feelings of ordinary people and sympathy with their goodness, this idea seems ridiculous, and it demotes Austen to a lower pantheon of artists who do not attempt to transcend themselves. But Austen is not apolitical. She explores such issues as the uncertain social status of the rising professional classes and the topical issue of female rule. For example, in a close reading of the scene in Emma where Frank sees Mr. Perry riding by his horse and asks what has become of the apothecary's ambition of setting up his carriage, it shows that Austen was drawing from debates in Parliament, which hinged on whether the apothecary was to be a tradesman on a horse or a professional man who used a carriage for daytime visits. And in her book Persuasion, we learn that her inquiry into the question of who will and who deserves to win the peace after the ending of the Napoleonic Wars also involves allusions to the tropical issue of female rule, a notion advanced during the Regency period to thwart the power of the Prince of Wales. Anne's capability thus shimmers with historical resonance. She, like Queen Charlotte, is the one who should, but is not allowed to govern the estate or nation. Queen Charlotte was the wife of King George III, and she ruled as the Queen Consort of Great Britain and Ireland until her death in 1818. This was all about Jane Austen. Jane Austen primarily wrote during the Regency period, and she was immediately followed by the Victorian Age, which saw the rise of Victorian writers. If you'd like to know more about the Victorian writers that followed Jane Austen, have a look at these lectures.